Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Willow from 1988. In the 80s, George Lucas decided to kind of make a follow-up or new franchise based on a treatment he wrote in the 70s. We were sort of working out 70s ideas called Munchkins. He approached Ron Howard, who he'd worked with on American Graffiti, and for a little bit, Ron Howard was considered sort of a George Lucas protege. He came to him, an executive produced this film. He did not produce it. Despite a lot of people say he did, but he did not. And Lucasfilm helped make this film, and it was kind of a risk at the time. There was a lot of fantasy in the 80s, but it was in the early 80s. It was considered kind of missing the mark when Black Cauldron came out 3 years before this did. No studio really wanted to release this film. MGM did because Alan Ladd Jr. was there, who had greenlit Star Wars, and George Lucas had a relationship with him. Otherwise, no one wanted anything to do with a big budget fantasy film at this point because they knew it wasn't going to make money. Willow wasn't exactly a bomb. It did fine for its box office and all that, but it didn't become the cultural hit that George Lucas really wanted. He wanted this to be like as big or bigger than E.T. or something. And I think for most people this was not a big hit. But I was about 4 years old, actually younger than my daughter is now, when I saw this film for the first time in theaters actually. And I was definitely around 5 when it came out on video, and holy shit was I obsessed with this movie as a kid. I absolutely adored it and loved it, and I watched it all the time. I thought it was so cool, this neat fantasy thing. I liked Mad Mardigan and Willow. I liked following their adventure. It had a cute baby in it. It felt more kid-like. It was just something like I fell in love with, like this kind of adventure. You know, it felt like a family adventure that was made for me. You know, for a kid like me who likes swords and, you know, He-Man and Star Wars and stuff like that. I think I had most of the action figures. My dad got them all for me one Christmas, mostly because he found them all when they were all on sale because this movie didn't do well. But it's the thought that counts because I thought that was really cool, and I still think that's really cool. And I really love seeing this movie. I think I saw it at the Rotunda in Baltimore. I don't remember. If my dad wants to counter in the comments, sure. I should have texted him and asked, but I remember it was at the Rotunda in Baltimore. When I saw it, I just fell in love with this film. I'm older now, and I've seen a lot more movies since then. And a lot more movies in theaters since then. Not so much currently, but you know. Willow, I still have a soft spot for this movie. Mostly because I watched it a bazillion times when I was a kid, but also because it is such a unique period in Lucasfilm with George Lucas, who I think has a lot more to do with this film than he's really credited for. Although I think there's a lot more authors to this than just George Lucas. It's just interesting because we basically go from our knowledge of George Lucas is you get THX all the way up to Return of the Jedi. Pretty consistent filmography there. He was majorly involved in all those films, even though he did not direct Empire and Jedi. He was majorly involved in those. Then he stops and he makes this and Howard the Duck and falls off the face of the earth for most of the 90s. Dates Linda Ronstadt. Yes, that happened. Look it up. It's kind of like this weird period. And I think Willow shows you who he was then and what would become of him in cinema. Some of the biggest things that happened, at least in terms of film in the 80s, was he sold Pixar, he made a comic book movie, and a fantasy film. Sounds like dude knew what was going to happen in the next decade or so. He just, you know, it just wasn't ready yet. The thing this gets that I think Star Wars, the original trilogy, works so well is the charisma between the leads works so well. Warwick Davis is a little green, but I think it works here because he has such enthusiasm. One of the things you read about when he was on the set of Return of the Jedi is he was like 10 in a Star Wars movie. He was beaming, like he had so much enthusiasm and they all loved him. You still get that enthusiasm now. I've always felt he sort of looks like Mark Hamill. It's just a personal weird thing probably. But in addition, his charisma with Val Kilmer, who is absolutely bringing it to this film. It is insane to me how much Val Kilmer was like, this is my movie star role. I don't care if this movie's a hit or not. I'm bringing it. And I think you see the same thing in another film he did in the 80s called Top Secret. There are certain stars, you see them in a movie and you're like, this is how it's going to make them a movie. So they have so much charisma. I honestly think Val Kilmer doesn't care. He is like, I'm going to kill it in this movie. Whether you witness it or not, hey, I'm Mad Mardigan. You know, I'm going to be Mad Mardigan whether you're here or not. He does have a rock star thing. You can tell, like, this is the guy who would play Jim Morrison in a couple years. It's fairly obvious. He does play, like, that burnt out rock star thing. And he plays it like he's, like, an amazing 70s singer who everyone knows is amazing, but nobody wants to deal with. And he is that amazing swordsman. And they do a good job of presenting it, I will say. He's not just, like, a movie star swords guy. Like, all the fights are like, you see, you know, when he's fighting General Kale or something like that, you see how he is doing it better than the other guys who just simply fail. He comes up with better fights and better moves and stuff like that. Like, in addition, like, his charisma is off the charts. His charisma with Warwick Davis works, especially with Joanne Whaley as Sorsha, who's kind of like the underdeveloped person in this. But I still think all three of them have such great charisma together. But particularly, most of the film is Val Kilmer and Warwick Davis. And I do think that reminds me of what I like about the original story. The main three had great charisma together. Ron Howard is at his kind of biggest, like George Lucas protege peak. It's interesting that George Lucas's two big proteges were him and Joe Johnston, because both are kind of more studio directors, and you'd think someone like George Lucas would be making more experimental filmmakers. But it's also interesting that, like, the story was by George Lucas, Lucasfilm produced this, most people attach themselves to George Lucas with this, but the screenwriter was selected by Ron Howard, who is Bob Dolman. Now, maybe he's just the credited screenwriter. I do think there's a lot of Lucas stuff in here. It's, like, fairly obvious. You can't take it away from here. Ron Howard did have creative input in this, and you can tell that. I think the way this film moves, Ron Howard knows how to make an efficiently compact film. It is interesting that Ron Howard and Lucas, their relationship is protege and mentor thing. It's sort of, you don't hear about it much after he turns down Phantom Menace. I don't know how much they're involved. You just don't hear about it after that. So I don't know, like, maybe they just lost touch or something. Although I did think it was interesting when they got Ron Howard to do Solo. It's like, well, he's finally the guy who directed Willow. And the protege got to direct a Star Wars film. It's films. I like how this film's shot. I think the special effects are fucking amazing. Sometimes a little too horrific. I was thinking of, at the beginning of watching this, I was like, this is a kid's movie. I can watch this with my daughter. And then, like, you know, Willow transforms a goblin with, like, John Carpenter the Thing like effects for some fucking reason, and makes it into, like, a thing with two heads with the Eber Siskel thing. I was like, okay, that alone. But then the pig sequence, which is, like, definitely scared me as a kid, definitely a thing of nightmares. That is pretty horrific sequence. Like, the horror elements of this is interesting because I know, like, Lucas was going through a dark period, and I will talk about that in a bit, but this and Temple of Doom are sort of like Lucas going more into horror, and he was kind of depressed, and the darker elements of what he's doing. And I don't think Star Wars is known for, like, horror necessarily. So it is interesting this film goes more into that. I don't think that's Ron Howard. I'm sorry, like, I really don't. Maybe he was like, let's go all in on the weird fantasy shit. But I heard this podcast called What the Force, which there are actually good Star Wars podcasts that actually talk about the ideas, and What the Force brought up this interesting idea that I had never thought about how this is Lucas after his divorce from Marcia Lucas. I've done a video on Marcia Lucas. I guess I'm a person one of the few people who knows a lot about that subject. You can watch that video if you would like. They had adopted a daughter. There's certain things about, like, maternal, masculine paternal fantasies that you'd even see in Mandalorian, which this thing takes on, although that's like a lone wolf and cub and samurai trope and stuff. But in this, there is the three of, like, Sorsha, Mad Mardigan, and Willow. Most of the film, Sorsha is in it, but it plays with a lot of different gender roles in this, in that, like, most of the film is a patriarchal, the idea that you have two men basically watching this child and taking care of the child, as well as the idea that Mad Mardigan is in drag for a section of the film, that he's often playing with more looser, like, I would say more feminine clothing, as well as his relationship with Sorsha, where the love spell's put on him, and then she falls in love with Mad Mardigan, but she's not sure of the relationship, and it's kind of like a twist on that. And there are certain gender roles put up into question, not as much as, like, cool as we do now, but for 1988, hey, it's a little more progressive than you'd expect. But it is interesting when you think about that, because I'd never viewed it that way. The other thing they bring up, a lot of this is sort of about parenting, I will say, in a certain regard. Particularly, like, anytime they're in a fight, they have to figure out what to do with Laura Dannon. I guess I didn't really bring up the plot of this movie at all, but You should know it. It's about a guy, and but every time Willow is trying to do anything, whether it's being a great wizard, whether it's getting in anywhere, like fighting a goblin or a troll, a troll, he has to put Elora down somewhere. He has to deal with the baby at the same time. And I think that is a part of parenting where you're like, especially like trying to do anything, and maybe he did feel like that, especially like Lucas worked for, his home was the Skywalker Ranch, where he had to deal with like work at the same time as his daughter, as well as I do think a major section of this film is like he has to convince Mad Mardigan to help him, and he's trying to say in the plot and the idea of the film is that the idea is that they are saving the baby who's going to save the world, but they don't really know that. And I think Mad Mardigan knows that. And I think the idea is like, that's sort of like what it is being a parent. It's like you're doing the best you can. You're trying to, the next episode or part of the movie, but you're trying to save this kid and put them in the best situation. And maybe it doesn't make sense. And maybe this baby won't save the world. Almost everyone is telling them this baby will not. It's not worth it. Like, what will this person become and stuff. But I think Willow's hopefulness, the film and the character as well, but the hopefulness is that you are doing something good, that you are doing something good for someone else, and that you are on this great adventure and this great adventure of parenting, because in the end the world will be greater because your impact you're having on this person who can't talk and poop themselves and stuff. There is a greater good of raising someone and doing the right thing by them and protecting them and being selfless in the end. And there is a greater good in that and a hopefulness for the future. And I actually think that is what Willow is fucking about. It's very obvious when you put it out that the whole film is them saving a baby who's the future. Like, there's no other than Willow's kids, there's no other kids in this. It's like this is crazy, this is insane, why are we doing this? But we're doing this, and we need to do this for the future and for these kids, and hope that they grow up and do the great thing that we need our society to be. And you put all your love and hope into that. And this film is about that. Like, she's a baby. You don't know, I know they made those sequel books and all that crap, but like you don't know, like, did she, I guess we'll find out in the Disney Plus show, but we don't know if she'll become a great leader. And I think much of that is wrapped up into this. A lot of this is the hopefulness of being a parent. Like, there's a reason Lucas had this treatment from the 70s, then suddenly was like, I think I've cracked it. And it's right when, he's a divorced dude with a baby and he's not sure what to do with himself. And I do think it's like him sort of working out those emotions, because after this he adopted another kid. I think he has a kid now with his second wife. I think he has 4 kids or something. I'm not entirely sure. I believe he has 4 children, but I'm not sure. But it seems like this was him going what, it is worth it, and you are doing something positive, and you are putting forth good into the next generation, and it doesn't matter how this all works out. It matters that you tried. I don't know if these are good words, and much like Willow, I don't know if it anyone cares or anything like that. But I think watching it this time made me come around to it and understand that there was a greater thing going on with this. I know this isn't a period of Lucas that people, or even Ron Howard, or I guess Warwick Davis fans, so represent, care about. But to me as a kid, it represented a great adventure. The idea of the sacrifice of the great adventure, the way Star Wars did, or the way Sword and Sorcery epics did, the way my grandfather would tell me about Robin Hood and stuff like that. This represented that. And I think as I am an adult and watching it and understanding those things about what Lucas was talking about, what Warwick Davis is putting forward, it kind of warms my heart more, but makes me kind of believe in this crazy, life adventure that I'm on now, the kind of hopefulness you have in the future, and the hopefulness you have for the adventure itself, and going on it, just, having Mad Mardigan smile at you, and realizing that you are going to be going forward and pushing forward, and maybe it doesn't make sense, and maybe that red-haired guy who's his friend, who I don't know that guy's name still, I really don't, 30 years however many years later, I don't know that guy's name, but it's a good point, is this kid gonna save the world? But it's does it matter in the end? you need to do what's right. They need to fight the evil sorceress. And maybe life isn't that dramatic, but part of me realized what was really going on, maybe in the meta narrative, or maybe just Lucas ain't that deep, guys. I think it is there, and it kind of makes you want to hear that heroic, amazing James Horner score, who brings it and brings his best. Like, he's like, I'll do that, you know, the work of this film the way John Williams did, but is in his own way. That heroic score like makes me feel like I can take on an entire army myself, and the spirit of this film gives you that energy to keep going and doing what's right in your life, and hoping you can, you know, save that kid from the sorceress and put them on the right path. And maybe that's cheesy, maybe that's corny, but like, whatever. It's Willow. I've never really given up on this movie. It's always been a favorite of mine. It's always been something I really love. And I think watching it this time, realizing this, and the What the Force podcast, thank you for that. I think I really came around and realized like the real adventure they were on the whole time. And maybe I've been on that adventure as well. And it's a great adventure to be on. And to be on that again with Willow. So if you have seen Willow and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.